Hello, in my past 3 videos I've talked about the value of developing an alpha state. Now by this I mean a relaxed state of mind and body in which the electrical activity of the brain is dominated by waves of between 8 and 14 cycles or wavelengths per second. When we're measuring brain activity in my laboratory, we can see these alpha waves pictured in red as shown here. Slower wavelengths are depicted in blues and greens. In the previous videos I discussed the importance of physical relaxation as a necessary prelude to focusing and relaxing the mind. So what are the advantages and benefits of mastering physical relaxation? Early work by the Harvard psychologist Dr. Harry Benson showed that relaxation reduces your heart rate by about 3 beats per minute, decreases the rate of breathing, and the body's need for oxygen. This is reduced by about 20%. All of which means that there's a decrease in the rate of metabolism, and that's similar to that which you only otherwise find in very deep sleep or even hibernation in animals which hibernate. Another important fact is that blood lactate, this is a substance produced in your muscles and very often when high associated with levels of stress, is reduced. Your blood pressure becomes more normal at close to 120/80. Most importantly for this program, there's an increase in the production of alpha waves. In this video I want to talk about ways of enhancing the development of alpha still further and to discuss some of the problems you may well encounter when you're first learning this very important skill. At the end of this video I'm going to show you some clips of people with whom I've worked over the past 4 decades I should say, not 4 years. These include a triathlete, a television presenter and a Shaolin monk. If you already practice meditation, you're probably familiar with and quite comfortable with specific ways of creating that sense of relaxed focus. Well, there are many of these ways, and so I suggest you stay with what you're comfortable with. I'm going to offer you another way which is based on my research. I suggest you must start by physically relaxing, as I discussed in the last video, and preparing your surroundings, again that I've described. Be sure the clothes you're wearing are loose and comfortable, and that you're sitting in a room which is quiet as possible and sufficiently warm so you'll feel comfortable, even if you have to spend 10 to 15 or 20 minutes completely inactive. I advise you not to have eaten or drunk anything like tea or coffee or alcohol which are either sedating or stimulating, and you should avoid these for about an hour or so before you practice meditation. Now I want you to sit back, close your eyes and focus on the space between your 2 eyes. This is what Eastern practitioners term the third eye. During your initial sessions, I suggest merely focusing on the blackness which you'll see in front of you. Don't attempt at first to introduce any imagery. I think many people rush at it too hard and they fail as a result. With a little practice you should be able to start introducing simple images which you can visualize. For many beginners, useful early images might comprise nothing more complicated than, say, a black and white geometric shape, such as a triangle or a square, and these you might try and see either as black on a white background, as I'm showing you here, or as white against a black background. Don't struggle to force this shape to appear, just let it gradually materialize in front of you. At first it may only be a vague and slightly out of focus shape, or even no more than the idea of that shape. I suggest that when you start, you silently count your inhaled and exhaled breaths. Don't try to change these in any way. Merely notice in a detached way as your chest rises and falls. Once you feel comfortable maintaining your focus when you're visualizing nothing more complicated or interesting than a square or a triangle or a circle, I suggest you look for something physical. Now, some instructors suggest you actually place a physical object such as an apple, let's say, on the table in front of you, gaze at the apple with your open eyes for a few seconds, then close your eyes and try and recreate that image in your mind's eye. Now, I found a more effective method is to visualize a room, which you do very well in childhood. I visualized the bedroom I had when I was about 10 or 11. Try and imagine yourself back in that world of childhood and try and see the details of the decoration, the ornaments, the furnishing, any pictures hanging there. Try and see that room as vividly as you can in your mind's eye. As it becomes less difficult to construct and maintain this image, you could move to a more detailed scene, such as a flower, for example, as I'm showing you here. You could in fact look at these images on the screen, then close your eyes and visualize them in your mind's eye once again. Doesn't matter how vague the images are at first, but try and introduce more colour and detail in as you progress. Some meditators following the Eastern religions such as Buddhism or Hinduism often like to picture what is called a mandala. I'm showing you a mandala here. Now, a mandala is simply a chart or a geometric pattern that represents wholeness. It attempts to show the world within your body and the world beyond your body, beyond your mind and body. One of the images I personally find very relaxing is I imagine myself lying in a sunny meadow on a lovely summer's day and staring up through the tall grasses around me at white clouds drifting slowly across the sky. Now, what I've described here may not sound very difficult, and for some people it is indeed quite easy. It's fairly straightforward. For others, I have to say myself included, it's quite tricky when you first start. At least I found it so. You find it hard to maintain a focus for any length of time. You see that your brain is a very busy organ. It gets easily bored and it's constantly seeking out fresh stimulation. It's looking for new sights, new sounds, new excitement, something different. This means that when you start to focus on any one thing for any length of time, it tends to disturb you, it tends to interrupt you. It pops another thought into your head, it interferes with your powers of concentration. You go from one thing to the other. Now, when this happens, and it almost certainly will, my advice is just to notice the intrusion, not to worry about it or to notice it too intently. Just let it, don't dwell on it, just let it pass by you and return then to your original imagery. I like to think of that drifting, that intruding thought, as being caught up by one of my clouds which are drifting slowly past my visual gaze and taking the intruding thought out of my perception. I think you'll find, as many people have in practicing meditation or alpha productions, I like to call it, that this can be quite tricky. And I suggest there are 4 ways of keeping up your motivation in those early and often somewhat frustrating days. I think the first thing to remember is that, like any new skill, learning to focus your mind will take you time and practice to perfect. I mean, if you were going to play tennis, you wouldn't expect to go on a court for the first time, never having picked up a racket in your life, and play like a professional. So you should never feel concerned or disappointed if at first focusing your mind, therefore developing more alpha, seems a very elusive, perhaps even impossible skill to attain. It's not. It just requires practice and patience. Second, as I said before, don't become aggravated or disheartened at the start. As an intruding thought arises, just notice it. As I say, allow it to pass you by. Don't dwell on it for any moment of time. Don't worry about it. Once that's happened quietly, return your mind to whatever you are visualizing, whether this was at the start just total blackness, or a geometrical shape, a mandala, or some detailed visual scene. My third piece of advice is don't try too hard. As we saw with relaxation, some people attempting to relax actually become more anxious as they relax. I remember when I was using my brain train with executives in big companies, I found some of these men and women were very, very competitive, super competitive. And as a result, they tried too hard to get the train to move. And because of this, they tried too hard. In the alpha game, the harder you try, the less successful you're likely to be. Finally, my fourth point is I suggest keeping a brief written record of any progress you're making. You don't need to write whole essays, just a few brief notes about what worked, what didn't work quite as well, what prevented you from attending to any one thing for any length of time. So, is this all worthwhile? I'm asking you to invest some of your time and energy in this. Is the time and effort I'm suggesting you to invest really worthwhile? Is it going to bring you any results? Well, I have to say, after about 40 years of helping people develop alpha skills and learn relaxation, my answer would have to be absolutely yes. And by way of evidence, I'd like to show you 3 examples of just how powerful, helpful and useful developing an ability to produce alpha at will and for sustained periods can prove. The first 2 clips are taken from a BBC documentary made about my work in around 1987, and it was made for the popular TV science series on the BBC called QED. In this film, I worked with 4 people who presented themselves with 4 very different problems. One was a young man who was very shy and lacking in confidence with the opposite sex. He desperately wanted to develop a more outgoing personality, a more confident personality, so that he could, find love, and the love which he'd so often passed him by, which he'd been missing from his life for so long. And I'm glad to say that after training, he did succeed in finding the girl of his dreams, and that's was shown on the film. The second was a very competitive father with a young son. I think the boy was 10 or 11, and they were both keen at target shooting with air rifles. Now, he found that his anxiety when he was competing prevented him from performing at his best, and as a result, well, as an embarrassing result, I have to say, it was the son who didn't always beat him when they would compete together, and he didn't like to be beaten by a 10-year-old. I'm glad to say that he too achieved a much better score after he developed the alpha skill and learned how to relax when playing his sport. The clips I'm showing you here concern another of my subjects, a triathlete who developed stomach cramps when he moved from cycling to running in what is called the Ironman contest, which is a very tough physical contest indeed. The second features a well-known television presenter called Tony Arthur. Perhaps you've heard of her. In the 80s, she presented Play School, a very popular program, and a whole series of other popular programs. She explained to me that despite her years of experience and her professional training, she became very anxious when on air. And what she really wanted to do, which she'd never been able to do, was to actually thread a needle on air. That may sound very easy, but she had never been able to do it until she followed my suggestions for developing alpha.
One of the 200 people David says have tried the plan already is Kevin O'Neill. What's it done for him? Kevin competes in an incredible event called the triathlon. It's long-distance swimming and cycling and running.
The distances vary from about a mile swim, 25-mile ride and 6-mile run up to a full Ironman distance. which is a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile ride and a 26 mile run. But you don't do many of those in one season. Last season I had a lot of trouble with stitches. Coming off the bike, when you're hunched up, when you straighten out on the run, I found my stomach cramped up in every event. Well, I've been using the Alpha plan to warm the stomach muscles in training and just imagine the pain sort of flowing out of the legs. And I found in this season, in racing, every time I've had a stitch, it's gone within 1 or 2 kilometres. I just don't seem to have bad races anymore. Every time something goes wrong, I'm able to focus myself on my racing, on what I'm doing. So as a result of that, I'm performing far more consistently.
Overall, his improvement has been quite remarkable. He's very, very pleased with it. He was the first British competitor past the post in the Nice triathlon, which is one of the big European contests. And he now works for a French triathlon team as a professional competitor.
The thing that I couldn't do before I started the Alpha experiment, when in fact the thing that I would never let myself be thrown into, was threading a needle and thread on camera. I was asked to do it many years ago, and I just couldn't do it. I'm long-sighted as well as had shaky hands. So this is the ultimate test now, isn't it? I'm gonna have a go. I've got that. I have to always lick the thread first, because that's the way my mum taught me. Oh, look at that. And that was a first take. Yay! I did it. Honestly.
My third and final clip shows a young man called Matthew Ahmed, quite a remarkable young man. At the age of 16, he left home and he flew to China to train as a Shaolin monk. And it took him 10 years of constant, rigorous, dedicated practice to acquire his extraordinary ability both in combat and in combating pain. In this clip made by Off the Fence Productions for the American television series Stan Lee's Superhumans, you'll see first of all his unique way of going into a deep state of alpha. He then pushes my Toyota Land Cruiser, a vehicle which weighs I think around 2 tons, across one of the car parks at the university where I was working. He did this, you'll be amazed to know, by placing the point of a very sharp spear against his unprotected throat, with the other end of the spear resting on the Toyota's front bumper. So let's take a look at that.
His brain is relaxed.
So at this point, Matthew's going into his chi.
Now seeing a big increase in alpha just now. Wow. You see the whole brain just flooded with alpha. Very interesting indeed. Look at the amount of alpha which is being generated right across both sides of the brain. A ton of vehicle going to about a half a centimetre at the point of his throat. That is pretty impressive.
Matthew is now past the 14-foot mark, but he's still going.
See the focus, the concentration.
I'm most grateful to the BBC and to Stan Lee's Superhumans for allowing me to show you these clips. Now, in this necessarily short video, I have not been able to go into the various techniques of meditation in any great detail. Should you be interested in learning more, I can recommend 2 books which will fill in some of the missing background from my video. The first is called The Meditators Handbook. It's written by Dr. David Fontana and it's extremely good. I advise you to try and get hold of it. The second book is Meditation by James Hewitt. Now I printed details of both these books at the end of this video. In an earlier video, I discussed ways of using your breathing to improve your relaxation. Now, since I posted that, I've had numerous requests for further information about breathing, so I thought I'd devote my next video into looking at greater details about the way you should set about this, the way about you could use your breathing to help you relax. If you've enjoyed this video, and I do hope you have, do please indicate it below. And to avoid missing any of the other videos which we produce weekly now, either by my hypnotherapist colleague Dan Jones or by myself, then I suggest you subscribe. Until then, until the next time we meet up, goodbye and thank you very much for watching.